Hello everybody and welcome to this video today looking at the build of the Airfix Club Kit 2025, which is this gorgeous looking Messerscmitt Me.410 in captured colours. There is already an unboxing of this kit, so check that out if you want to see what you get inside the box before coming back to this one to see what I did with it to make it the revolving beauty you see before you. But for now, I've got coffee in my system, so let's just get on with it. The original tooling date for this kit was 2023, although that is the original Airfix version of the Me.410. This particular version, of course, has alternate parts to make the A3 variant. According to the website, there are 137 parts included. We have two schemes, although they are the same aircraft in different times of its life. And I've put the recommended retail price at £35. That is actually the price of the club membership in the UK. The kit itself is a Series 4 kit, which would normally be about £24.99 by today's prices, but of course you can't buy it separately. So if you do pick this up secondhand for more than that, you may not be getting the best value, unless of course it's something you really want. Construction begins with the cockpit area, as to be expected, and there is quite a lot of cockpit with quite a lot of detail, and there is quite a lot of glazing for you to see all of that detail. So personally, I do think it is worth paying extra attention to the fit of all of the parts here, because if not, it will potentially the fuselage won't sit together and it will look a bit silly. The cockpit area is broken up into sections. So at the front we have, at the top front, we have the pilot's area, which is then glued to an adjoining bulkhead, and this second piece that goes across the top, which is, I believe, the framework that supports the rest of the structure. For this particular version, we have to remove these locating tabs towards the front of the wing section, and there are some holes to drill out if scheme A is being done as opposed to scheme B, and vice versa. So with a knife, I'm just cutting these tabs free. This allows the bottom piece that we're going to see later to be glued in. And the holes in the wings are for either the dipoles of scheme A or the drop tanks of scheme B. So strictly speaking, I suppose if you do scheme B, you don't actually need to drill any holes, as long as you don't fit the drop tanks. As I've opted for scheme A, I did have to drill the holes. Also, fun point to note is that the instructions are very clear as to which ones you drill. There are 6 holes, you drill 4 or 2, depending on what you're doing, and I still managed to mess it up on one side, so there is actually an extra hole on one side of the wing, because I just wasn't paying attention. So, word of advice, pay attention to what you're doing if you want the model to look right. Moving on to the wing piece then, we have the main spar, which also acts as a mount for the seat and general area for the second man. So this is a rear-facing seat. We do have his instrument panel in front of him as well, but I'm not including that yet. That is going to be painted separately. We then move on to the fuselage halves, which have various bits of instrumentation and panels and what have you glued on it, as well as this little bulkhead which supports the tail wheel. That needs to be glued in, of course, before the fuselage halves go together. Not much of that can be seen, actually, the wheel bay, but of course there's nowhere to stick the wheel if you don't. And we do have various other sticky outy controls as well, both sides of the fuselage, which will need to be glued in at this point. And you can see me here dry fitting just to make sure that everything is nicely aligned. Now, there were no issues with the fit of this kit, as to be expected for a modern Airfix tooling, but it is always still worth dry fitting just to make sure that you personally haven't messed up something. Now, the interior will be painted this black-grey RLM 66, which was just brush painted on. However, the interior, as you can see, has been primed. It's much lighter now. That was just some Tamiya extra fine grey primer that I tend to use quite a lot on my models. The Hataka version of it is quite thin and actually a bit unpleasant. I don't want to put it through the airbrush in case it clogs it, but nor do I enjoy brush painting it, so probably just need a new one. And then we have RLM 02 Grey. This was the standard kind of primer colour or interior colour up to a certain point in the war, and then cockpits were darkened, but things like the wheel bays were still painted RLM 02. Being a model layer colour, this is much better in the airbrush, so popped in, no thinner, and all the relevant parts sprayed RLM02. This is also the introduction of the gun bay at the nose of the aircraft, which also got blasted with RLM02. And then we move on to the interior decals. These go on the side-mounted modules next to the pilot, so we just have blocks of controls. Airfix have moulded these pieces as raised, so all the controls are very pronounced. Even with a lot of decal solution, I could not get these decals to sit properly, so I just got rid of them and dry brushed the detail instead, because I got frustrated with it and I don't really see the need for it anyway, given how raised the controls are. There is a window that goes down from the front seat to the gun bay, so that has to be glued in now. It cannot wait, it has to go in. The instructions actually ask for it to be glued in much earlier than this, but I waited until I could airbrush, and you see here I've picked out some of the detail on the wall as much as I could before then gluing it. So this is the last possible stage that I thought made sense to glue that clear part in, and then those modules can go in. So we've got the gun bay onto the bottom of the cockpit floor, and the cockpit area as a whole, which has been picked out in a few colours here, can be glued onto the side. And then we do the last bit of the interior, which is this swivel mount for the guns, because of course there were two, I'm going to say remote operated, they sort of weren't, they were controlled by the person, the second man, the gunner. But you got the swivelling bit which goes in on one side. You don't glue it in, of course. You then glue the fuselage halves together, which is what I'm doing here. I'm just using the lid of my contactor glue just to basically poke it in the hole and make sure it's all lined in. There's a satisfying click when it is, and so by not gluing it in, just sandwiching it in between the fuselage, the guns will be able to move, and we'll see the results of that later. It's also at this time that the top wing pieces can go to the main bottom wing piece. I don't know why I worded that in such a long, complicated way. The wings can be glued together, is what I am trying to say. There was the tiniest bit of bowing that you saw on the main wing there, but nothing that the glue couldn't sort out. And then the horizontal stabilisers at the rear can also be glued together. They are in two parts each. The starboard one placed on the starboard side of the aircraft as it is on my cutting mat. We have an option for the flaps to be open or closed, so there are alternate parts for whether they are open or closed. These flaps were spring-loaded, so when the aircraft took off and the airspeed was enough, the flaps would retract, and when the airspeed dropped, then they would extend. I quite like having them extended, so that is what I've done, although this does provide complications with lining up the camouflage pattern, which, had I thought about it at all, I would have realised, but I didn't think about it. I just went, the slats would look better open. And yes, strictly speaking, they're leading edge slats, not flaps, but hey, close enough. They do the same job. With the tail assembled, we then move on to the new sprue, which is what makes this the A3 version. This probably should have been assembled at the same time as the rest of the interior, because then I could have painted it at the same time, but alas, I did not. We do have another clear piece for this window space down there, which goes near this bulkhead, and there is a bit of a seat as well. So it's fairly simple, this bit of the interior, and admittedly you can't see that much of it, but there we go. I did find the fit was a little bit awkward. There are these raised edges on the actual fuselage piece that you can see here, the fuselage pieces. They need to be sanded smooth, otherwise the piece simply won't fit together. Engine nacelles next, two of, and they are made in such a way that you can't get them the wrong way round, because they have a large side for the outboard of the engine piece, whereas the inside has a short one, so again, you can't mess it up. And there are some parts of some models that are just really nice. They just feel really satisfying to glue them in. And I think this was my favourite bit. There's just something so nice about the way that they fit in. Anyway, we have the radiators next, which are at an odd angle. So again, you can't get them the wrong way around. But we have the front and back pieces glued together. And I then very quickly moved them onto the main base and then stuck the sides on. And I say quickly because it was much harder to get the front and back pieces aligned and happy. So I thought by very quickly gluing them onto the base, we can use those indexing points to make sure that they are in the right place, and then the sides can be quickly glued on and the whole thing can dry together. There is an option for radiator flaps to be open or closed. I opted for open. This is just one of those builds where I thought it would look good in sort of inspection mode, and the opening is done by just having this movable piece on the top of the wings, which can be positioned either opened or closed. Not exactly a high-tech solution, but it works. Now we move to final construction, really. So we have control surfaces on the wings, so the ailerons, and again, these have the option of being posed, although I did keep those as straight. We have the clear piece that I mentioned in the lower nose of this reconnaissance version. So now that the whole thing has also been painted RLMO2, that can go in, and the nubs on the fuselage pieces had been sanded completely gone. This is the piece, by the way, which requires you to cut those steps right at the beginning. It's joining the wing root. The exhausts also go in. I don't normally glue exhausts in this early on in the build. However, these exhausts have a shroud over them. So once the exhausts themselves have gone in, there is a big shroud, as seen here, which completely covers them up, meaning there's no point. You don't really save anything by holding off because it's all going to be the main colour, and you're only really going to see the exhausts from underneath or from the front, so it just doesn't matter. And then those fuselage guns. As long as you are careful with where you place the glue and the instructions tell you exactly where to place the glue, you can stick these guns in and they can move. Now, admittedly, not everyone's going to care about having moving parts, and it does create some complications with airbrushing, as you may see in the footage later, but it gives you the option, and I thought you might as well. The barrels themselves are not being stuck on just yet, though they will follow later. Finally, before the canopy goes on, there's this extra framework or support or whatever it is, and there is also the pistol grip for those rear guns, which goes across this little support bar towards the rear. Yes, I did drop that pistol grip into the fuselage at least a couple of times, but thankfully I always managed to find it, so it is still present on the model to this day. Finally, we have one of the most stressful modelling experiences of the year so far, which is the canopy. The canopy is in three main pieces, port, starboard, and this top piece. I couldn't find a particularly easy way of gluing them together without just using all three in one go. As in, sticking the port side doesn't really give support, sticking the top on doesn't give the correct alignment, things like that. So I bought some Deluxe Materials glue and glaze because I didn't want to risk the canopy of this one with my usual Revell contactor. This was my first time ever using glue and glaze, so I didn't know what sort of quantity to use or anything like that. I was just kind of winging it. I feel like it took a bit too long to line up, and there is actually a slight gap which I probably should have addressed. And of course, as you see here, I'm putting the port side in and it pushes the starboard side out. It was very frustrating. It took a lot of time and I'm not 100% happy with the result. I do actually have another Messerscmitt Me.410, so I'll be intrigued to see if I can do a better job on that one. One of the things I hate doing is masking, and especially if I'm cutting my own mask, it just winds me up. So I bought this masking set. Now, I am aware that this is for the wrong version of Messerscmitt Me.410. That is because I bought this soon after the kit had been released, and whilst they'd announced a set for this particular version, it hadn't been released yet. The only omission is the window at the bottom, which I just masked with my own tape. For the main colour, we are going for Vallejo Model Air RLM 04. According to Vallejo's own historical notes, this is a good match for a multiple of colours, including RAF Trainer Yellow. Personally, yeah, I can see it. It's not bright yellow, it's not a vivid yellow, it's a bit dull, a little bit orangey, and I think it works absolutely perfectly for this colour, so I'm happy to accept their recommendation on this. It does also give quite a nice opacity for a yellow. It's one of the better ones I've used. The primer that I used was just a Halford's white rattle can primer that I had used before. I will talk about that specifically shortly because they've clearly changed the formula, and this was only the second aircraft that I'd used it with. The top colour is of course green and brown, so we have the Model Air Vallejo British Standard Dark Earth, which again is their recommended formula for RAF Dark Earth, and I've used this colour for plenty of things before and I like it. I like the tone that it gives, and being a Model Air colour, it is formulated to just be chucked straight in the airbrush without thinner, although of course you may want to thin as necessary depending on what you're used to. Regarding the opacity of the brown, I do find that it needs a couple of coats, although on an aircraft of this size, you can generally finish painting it and then the first bit is already dry again, so you can do 2 coats or 3 coats in one sitting. And in case anyone was wondering, I was using my Fender 186 airbrush, which has the 0.25, I think, something like that. It's the one with the smallest needle, and I used it a lot when I was building models at this time, which is earlier on this year before I got my gallery. The trio of Vallejo model air is completed with the RAF dark green. Again, this is what they suggest is an appropriate colour. I find that this is horrendously thin and doesn't give the best finish until it's been left to dry and then recoated, then left to dry again, and sometimes a third coat. I have gone for a hard camo pattern, so I've used blue tack just to approximate where the divides should be, and then slowly building up the layers of green over the top of that. I do also find that this paint is exceptionally thin even for an airbrush paint, so it's definitely not one that I've ever put thinner with. You may wish to put some in if you want to avoid some tip dry, but unless you're particularly used to very thin paints, I would use this straight out the bottle personally. However, by no means is it a bad paint, and once you've got some experience with it, I think you can get decent finishes, and hopefully you'll agree that the green does look good at the end result of this. The new formula of Halford's white primer is, quite frankly, utter shite. For the second time running, it managed to cause the paint to flake. And there's no other changes that I have made in my technique or anything like that. It's not that I haven't washed it properly or whatever. Everything else that I've done with every other primer is exactly the same, but for this one, it just pulls the paint straight off. Considering how happy I was with the paintwork when I was doing it and with the masking still on, this was quite frankly heartbreaking, and the kit ended up sitting around for a few weeks whilst I worked out what I was going to do, because I was genuinely gutted. Everything else about it looks absolutely fantastic. But obstacles are there to be overcome, and overcome I did. I used some Hataka white paint to just flood the holes left by the ripped up paint, and then got the same Vallejo colours out and very carefully dabbed some brown in, because it was only the brown that it took off the top. It did take off some yellow as well, but on the top it didn't take off the green anywhere, which is weird. And just patched them and hope nobody would notice. A couple of coats were required, but then the gloss varnish came out, and I think most of it has been repaired successfully. The gloss varnish was of course applied in preparation for the decals. Scheme A is the captured one, Scheme B is the same aircraft prior to its capture, and we have some generic stencils as well. We have this historical information about them, including things like the stenciling, so they just painted around them. I found this incredibly frustrating. Essentially, if you apply the stencils correctly, you will need to very carefully mask or hand paint all the areas underneath the stencil and then apply the stencil. Now, the other way of doing it would be to add the base colour to the decal, as in to the stencil, and apply that on, but that then of course wouldn't work for the second scheme, which is in German colours, if you're using your own German colours. So there isn't really a good way of doing it, and I certainly did not want to go around painting tiny bits of RLM 76 over my otherwise good paintwork just to put tiny, barely visible stencils on. So, full disclosure, this aircraft is now wrong. There is of course no problem with the quality of the decals, they are cartograph, and there's even the historical note about placing the prototype P on one side at an angle, which really bugs me because it's wonky. Now, okay, it says that it was seen wonky in photos, so it's accurate, but it still annoys me. It's still wonky. Anyway, you've got to remember that you're making the model ultimately for yourself. Even though I'm presenting it here to the public on YouTube, I'm still making it for myself, for my shelf. And the lack of the stencils, to me, is less annoying than having to spend a lot of my life painting tiny little areas which may or may not end up being the right size for the large number of stencils. So there we go. It was a balancing act. I decided, yeah, sod it, this will do. Anyway, moving on. After the decals were applied, everything was given a coat of Vallejo matte varnish, and then the final pieces can be assembled, including the horrendously fiddly undercarriage. The support leg has to be clicked into place, if you like, but you have to really dig in there to get it. So you've got the main leg and then you have to dig the support legs into it and whatever. One of them was fine, the other one just refused. We also have the door, which goes on the front, and of course the tail wheel as well. Weirdly, the leg is a separate piece. That's fine, that's not weird, but the undercarriage doors for that rear bay are all one piece, and they have this little support strut in the middle. Just an interesting way of doing it. It works. I don't know if that strut between the two legs is in any way accurate, but it means you can fit them slightly easier than otherwise, I guess. We then have the propeller assemblies, and remember, the propellers were painted RLM 70. Don't go painting German propellers black, or you will cause chaos in the universe, and you're almost certainly not going to be let through those pearly gates as and when you get there. In this instance, I didn't bother priming any of this. This is just RLM 70 in the airbrush, straight on raw plastic. The hubs have been assembled already, as they are the same colour as the propeller blades, so the entire lot was just painted RLM 70. The dipoles had been painted separately. You can see here there's an extra hole on this wing. That was what I mentioned earlier, me being a total idiot and not reading properly. But the dipoles are on. They were on last because, well, they're small and fiddly and I was likely to knock them off. And for the same reason, the radio antenna above the cockpit and the gun barrels were also glued in right at the end. Obviously, these needed to be touched up separately, just with a paintbrush. Oh, and also with a paintbrush, I did this. So I painted the yellow propeller blade tips because that was RAF practice, but the spinner also had this red spiral, which is standard for German aircraft. So I painted that by hand. Is it perfect? No. Could I have done better? Definitely. Should I have done better? Probably. Do I care that much? No. That's fine. They're glued on and they look all right. Here is the finished result. The Messerscmitt 410 in captured RAF colours as per the Airfix Club Kit 2025. What do I think? Well, I had a good time building the kit, other than the canopy, as mentioned, and the heartbreak of the primer, although on the end result, it's not actually that noticeable. In fact, there was a while that I forgot about it until I saw the footage and went, oh yeah, I nearly threw it across the room because of the primer. Yeah. In case you're wondering, yes, the guns move. The difficulty with having them as moving parts is you spray primer over everything and then you move the guns and, of course, there's no primer underneath. So they needed to be constantly adjusted when I was painting. In hindsight, probably should have just glued them fixed because I don't really care about moving parts that much, but hey, they are there. The other complication, of course, as I mentioned, was the slats. You can see, because the slats have moved forwards, there's a break in the camouflage line, so I had to predict where the camouflage would end up. It had to be basically a straight line at those points. It would have been much easier just to have the slats closed, but I like the look of it, and those Messerscmitt slats are very distinctive, so I wanted them open. Even though I acquired a Messerscmitt 410 when it was first released, as in, the normal version, I still haven't actually built it. And so this was my first experience of the 410. So I can't really compare this with the normal release, but considering they share the tooling for the vast majority of it, I can't imagine that kit is going to be anything other than as excellent as this. There was no flash, there were no fit issues, and other than the canopy, I didn't have any problems actually assembling this thing. The historical notes that they've applied on the instructions are incredibly welcome. Thank you very much, Airfix, for taking the time to include that. One, because it shows the credibility in what you're selling, because you're showing that you've done some research. And two, you're saving me from having to do the research. I say save it. I could obviously try and look it up and verify it myself, but I do trust that with the detail that they've applied, they are correct. And generally speaking, Airfix try and do something a little bit different with the club kits. I've made last year's, which was the Spitfire and Typhoon. They were just different because they were D-Day themed, and they were, quite frankly, poorly presented, presumably rushed rubbish. The year before that was the Gloucester Meteor, which I've got, but I haven't built yet. In fact, let me know if you want to see that. It's the FR9 version that they did in 2023. This is much closer to the 2022 club kit, which was the Hawk first and last, because it showcases the same aircraft in a pre and post capture condition, although admittedly the Hawks, they give you 2 of them, but it's a simpler aircraft, so it makes sense. So I'm happy with this as being the club kit. I think Airfix made a good decision, and this kit ultimately felt like a good reward for joining the club this year, and I'm happy I bought it. But yes, let me know what you think. Do you think the end result looks good? Do you think it looks like crap? Have you built this and had troubles? Do you have any advice on how to assemble this canopy? I have heard from Model Minutes that the better option is to glue the canopy together separately and then assemble it to the aircraft. I might try that with my second one, but I would like some advice down below before I start building that, so you know what to do. If you've liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed already but you've enjoyed my content, then please do subscribe, because I like watching numbers go up. And I will also pop an affiliate link in the comments below, which will take you to the Airfix website, and hopefully if I get the link right it will go to the club kit, although in all honesty, if you're not in the UK, I don't recommend you join the club at all, to be honest. Sorry, it's a British thing until Airfix sort it out. But if you are interested, then if you use the link below, you support the channel that way. And of course, you can also support the channel by being a channel member, like the people appearing on screen. These wonderful people help support the channel with a small monthly contribution, and in exchange they get pictures of what's on my workbench and updates and things like that long before the public. In fact, I shared pictures of this aircraft, in February or March or something, when I first built it. It's been a while. Either way, join them if you want, and if you don't, that's fine as well. Hopefully, however, I will see you in another video. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.